I'm Randy Cohen, and I wrote a play called The Punishing Blow. A college professor is arrested in a drunken anti-Semitic outburst, and as part of his community service, the judge sentences him to deliver a lecture on one of the 100 most influential Jews of all time. This is a real thing, real in the sense of there's a list on the internet, and what's realer than that? Listing the 100 most influential Jews of all time. There's a book, which is even realer than the internet, listing the 100 most influential Jews of all time. So our guy, rather than choosing an obvious candidate, Einstein or Freud, or someone unambiguously influential, as a kind of thumb in the eye to the judge, picks Daniel Mendoza, the great 18th century Jewish, British, bare-knuckle boxer. And the play is the lecture he gives, which does not go quite as planned. I had a career as a prose writer, mostly humor pieces. I wrote for the New Yorker and the Atlantic and Harper's and those kind of places. And then did a fair amount of television after that. I wrote for Late Night during with David Letterman during the NBC years, and TV Nation, that Michael Moore show, and a bunch of other shows. And for the last 12 years, up until 5 minutes ago, I wrote the Ethicist column in Times Magazine. That was what I was doing when I started working on this play. No, I just ran across a reference to Mendoza, reading for pleasure. I was reading a lot of Boswell and Johnson for pleasure, and to understand the background, I read a wonderful book called London Life in the 18th Century by a historian named M. Dorothy George. And she makes a sort of passing reference to Jewish life in 18th century London. They were a kind of despised immigrant group until there rose among them a champion, this fellow Mendoza, who by rising to glory humanized these people, relieved some of the anti-Semitism. He's kind of the Muhammad Ali of 18th century Jews. And it just seemed an incredible story. And it turned out he wrote his memoirs, although like most kids of that time, he left school when he was 13, had the life of a prize fighter. But he goes on to write this wonderfully literate memoir. A fascinating book, and it seemed a story that someone should tell the story, and that someone was me. The play wasn't actually built as a play originally. I knew I wanted to tell this story, and the first thing I thought, in my dim-witted, cliche-ridden way, biopic. This would be a great movie. That Mendoza, a boxer's career ends quite early, and halfway through his life, he's 30. His career as a prizefighter is over, and he goes on to do all sorts of things, including performing in music halls, where he demonstrates scientific boxing. Because we're Jews, we do everything scientifically. So I thought you do this as a framed flashback. He's in his dressing room, there's a bird act, there's some singers, and he's about to go on and he tells you the story of his life. And I was pitching this around town, and a very wise development woman who was sympathetic to me, who cares about me, listened to my pitch and told me the 3 reasons why this movie would never be made. It's about Jews, it's about boxing, and it's about the 18th century. And I thought, well, yeah. And she said, you can find many examples of one. You will find no examples of a film that contains all 3. So I was just sort of crushed by all this and sought another way to tell the story. And I wrote all sorts of versions of it that just frankly were, crappy. I wrote crappy versions. They just weren't very good. My fault. And then it struck me that because of my job writing the ethics column, I've given a lot of public lectures, and that was a form I know a lot about. So I thought, well, what if you wrote this as a lecture? And then the question becomes, well, who is giving the lecture and why? And what's the relationship of that person to Mendoza? And then I got a gift from God. Well, I guess we all did, named Mel Gibson. And when Mel Gibson is arrested in this, vile, drunken, anti-Semitic outburst, and I thought, well, that could be my guy. And that's how it became a solo piece. Leslie is the protagonist of this piece. He's a college professor, and he's plateaued, we could say kindly. That he is presumably a brilliant college professor, or at least he was in his youth. He had every reason to think that life would then rain down rewards for his genius. He had a marriage that seemed promising to a woman who loved him, but decades later, that hasn't worked out so well either. That he is a man eaten up with frustration and jealousy. And sad because he had it in him to do brilliant things, and it's not clear. And I think in the end, an actor's choice and a director's choice, was he not rewarded because he personally falls short in some ways, or does he do things that thwart himself, or is this just one of the injustices of life? And I think that's there to be played many different ways. I had a chance to do this at the Woodstock Fringe Festival, and when I met with the producers, the very first thing they asked me was a question I wasn't expecting, which is, did you have an actor in mind? And this is my first play, and so the answer was no. I mean, I'm not a man of the theater. I am a man of the theater, but I'm sitting in the audience. I'm a man of the theater audience. I love the theater. I go to the theater, but I'm not in that world, and I didn't know. And then I remembered recently seeing an actor I really liked, and it was in the Orson Welles staged version of Moby Dick, and it was Seth Duerr. I thought, this guy would be great. It went no further than that. They just said, all right, let's talk to him. And they knew who he was, and they liked him, and it just all went off from that. It was effortless. I sent Seth the play, and I think he read it in 5 minutes. I assume he had his people read it in 5 minutes, and they told him he should do this, that he'd be very, very good in this. And he said yes, and we went on and did it at the Woodstock Fringe. Although the play has, I think, an appeal to a general audience, at least that's what you got in Woodstock. Young and old, tall and short, fat and thin, black and white, green and blue. I think it addresses interesting ideas that appeal to everyone, but its main character, although not a character seen on stage, is a significant person in Jewish history, so the play has a particular appeal to a Jewish audience. We had a chance to do it at the JCC on 75th Street. We did it at the Museum of the Holocaust. Yeah, that's great. Because everyone walks in. The play is quite funny. It's dark, but it's very, very funny, and nothing quite warms up a crowd like having them walk by several vivid reminders of mass death and the most grotesque sort of human suffering. Okay, now, 6 million dead. Laugh your ass off. Tough crowd. It's an architectural problem as much as a theatrical problem. But both went well. And then a show dropped out at the Clermont, and I just assumed it was some kind of All About Eve thing. I just assumed Seth, siphoned the gas out of someone's car or did something devious, and they just asked him, gee, do you know something we might put in here? And he said, why, yes, I do. And this time he would direct it and wreak a terrible vengeance on those who wronged him with what he saw as inappropriate directorial suggestions. And it was great. He knew the piece. It's fun on a budget. One actor, one stage, very little drinking on stage. So there's not much of a budget for that. And it was something we could turn around very, very quickly with Seth both performing and directing. So no one could say boo to him. I don't think I chose to write comedy. I think I write comedy. And as a member of the audience and as a reader, I like comedy. That I can understand how you could tell a complicated story about human beings that at some time wasn't funny. That's some of what it is to be human. So it wasn't that I chose. I'm not talented enough also I have many, many styles I could write in, and I've chosen this one as more apt for the material. I'm just not that good, and I write the way I write and try to do the best job I can. I think it's a canard to suggest that comedy ought not treat or cannot treat serious subjects. That the opposite of serious isn't. The opposite of funny isn't serious. The opposite of funny is somber. That it's a question of tone, not a question of significance. My favorite self-justifying quotations. You reach for history to justify. It's first the verdict, then the trial. And having decided this, then you seek bolstering. You seek the testimony of great historic worthies. And there's Coleridge, who said, "The true comic is the blossom of the nettle." Very nice. That Coleridge is going to amount to something. And Shaw says life doesn't cease to be funny because people die any more than it ceases to be serious because people laugh. That comedy is apt for anything. It's just what kind of writing you like to do, or are able to do, or stuck doing. One of the things I was very proud of, my little trick, Senior will have his little joke, was that without changing a word, the play could be done with any permutation of genders. Leslie could be a man. His beloved spouse, who's referred to that way without an identifying gender-linked pronoun, could be a man or a woman. So it could be straight man, straight woman, gay woman. And it would work great. And my sort of teen dream was at some point we would do this in rep and in rotation, that one night it would be Seth, and the next night it would be some female equivalent of Seth. The mind reels at the very thought, I know. And it would be interesting, I think, because the words wouldn't change, but the meaning of what we heard would change. That Leslie is violent, Leslie is angry, and male anger has a very different cultural meaning than female anger. Male aggression looks very different from female aggression. And then when we really get rocking, then the third night, because of the interesting history of African Americans and Jews, it should be an African American actor. I mean, of course, a man and a woman. I've heard sometimes African Americans are men and women, but you see, you could do it three ways. And the cool thing for producers then, each audience member must buy 3 tickets and come back 3 times. I think that's just savvy producing. During the Q&A of every production, because I like the Q&A, in many ways I think it's the form I excel at, and that the play is just an excuse for the Q&A. But the question comes up each time in each of these various venues where we've done it now, is Leslie an anti-Semite? At various times, Seth Duerr and I have differed about this. And we've, I believe, reversed roles several times. Of course he's an anti-Semite. You get drunk and what do you blurt out? Well, you blurt out what you think, in vino veritas. I mean, that's one version. That would be my thought. Another way to see it is, well, no, when you're drunk and angry, you don't blurt out what you think. You blurt out what will hurt the people around you. You don't even care if it's true. In the end, this isn't a question for me. I have my own idea, and I know what I thought when I was writing it, but audiences differed, and that was enormously rewarding. They were really engaged with the question, is he or isn't he? And what do we mean by that? And for me, especially as a first-time player, there was just no higher praise than to see them really grappling with that question. And I thought my job is not to justify anti-Semitism, to not justify anti-Semitism, to assert that he is, to assert that he isn't. That's not what a play does, that's what an essay does. My job is to try to present a human being as fully formed and complicated as I can, and then the audience can think about who that person is.